Welcome to Islamicus, where faith meets the future. In a world driven by technology and constant change, we explore how timeless Islamic wisdom connects with the digital age. From AI ethics to spiritual mindfulness in modern life, we uncover how faith can guide innovation and how innovation can deepen our understanding of faith. Join us as we bring together thinkers, scholars, and storytellers, shaping a smarter, more soulful tomorrow.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are about to do a deep dive into a topic that is incredibly complex, deeply historical, and absolutely essential for understanding the modern world.
We're talking about the evolution of modern Islamic political thought.
Exactly. And you shared a really fascinating selection of academic material with me. And the picture that emerges is it's not some fixed ideology. It's a centuries-long, often really painful negotiation.
It's true. I mean, the popular image often frames political Islam as, monolithic or static.
Right, that only responds to external threats.
Exactly. But the material you and I looked at, it shows this intense, continuous internal debate, a deep intellectual struggle, really, about how Muslim society should respond to the shock of Western modernity, secularism, and, of course, colonialism.
And that's our mission today. We want to give you the shortcut to understanding that very debate. We're going to synthesize the historical journey, the philosophical tools, and the political results.
The goal here is to give you the intellectual framework you need to grasp the core fault lines that are still shaping the Muslim world today.
And to do that, we have to start with the intellectual toolkit itself. We're going to be tracing concepts that aren't just historical footnotes. I mean, these are active parts of political platforms right now.
Things like Azla for reform, Tajdid for renewal, and the big one, Ijtihad, that crucial concept of independent reasoning.
And then on the political side, we'll see how these tools were used to debate the very meaning of Khilafah, the Caliphate, and Shura, or consultation.
It's a story of internal revitalization, not just external reaction.
Let's jump straight in. Section 1, the roots of renewal, and the moment the entire conversation was just fundamentally changed by the West.
So the documents make it really clear that the desire for internal reform for Isla and Tajdid is ancient in Islam. It's not new.
It's a continuous tradition.
A continuous spiritual tradition, always involving a call to return to the purest basic fundamentals. The Quran and the practices of the Prophet, the Sunnah.
But when this reform movement gets political, gets comprehensive, we call it nada. And the source material defines this perfectly. It implies a kind of historical sequence.
Right. It's this idea of a great past, that a period of perceived decadence, and now a current effort to revive that greatness.
It's the sound of a civilization deciding it's time to wake up.
But the alarm clock that truly jolted the political conversation was undeniably external. I mean, we can almost pinpoint the start of what we call Islamic modernism to the French occupation of Egypt.
Napoleon, 1798.
Exactly. That sudden, intimate exposure to a superior military, a superior scientific Western power. It forced Muslim scholars to analyze why. Why had they become subjugated, and how could they possibly catch up?
And what's so fascinating is how quickly that analysis just splintered into two fundamentally different approaches right there in the 18th and 19th centuries.
On one side, you had what we can call the purist path, the revivalists. And the most consequential example is Muhammad ibn ʿAbd al-Wahhab in Central Arabia.
His movement emphasized a strict return to pristine Islam and absolute adherence to Tawhid, the unity of God.
And that emphasis on Tawhid is absolutely key. It's not just for worship, it's political. If you insist on the absolute unity of God, you are essentially rejecting any human intermediary.
Like saints, mystics, even some traditional rulers who claim a kind of special authority.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the sources highlight the enduring legacy of this path. It's that religio-political pact that ʿAbd al-Wahhab forged with Muhammad ibn Saud way back in 1744.
An alliance that's now nearly 300 years old and provided the ideological force for what became the Saudi state. It's a model where strict religious doctrine serves as the foundation for state power.
Then on the complete opposite side, you have the modernist path. You have figures like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani and Muhammad Abdu. Their approach was all about compatibility.
They were arguing that Islam was inherently rational. They just fundamentally rejected the paralyzing idea that the faith itself was somehow holding back progress or was incompatible with modern science.
They turned the critique inward. They said the problem wasn't the revelation, it was the application. It was the historical failure of Muslim societies to keep adapting. Their whole mission was to reinterpret foundational principles to formulate new responses to those Western challenges.
Which, of course, leads us right into Section 2 and the modernists' dynamic vision, all centered on that critical philosophical tool, Ijtihad.
So the modernists' core diagnosis was that the Ummah, the global Muslim community, had entered this period of deep stagnation.
And this was because of something called taqlid.
Yes, taqlid, the slavish, almost mindless following of tradition. And they also pointed to the mindset of many of the ulama, the established religious scholars.
So if that stagnation was the disease, Muhammad ʿAbd basically prescribed the cure.
Which was the relentless application of ijtihad, independent reasoning. The goal was to liberate thought from the shackles of taqlid and allow Muslims to keep pace with changing times.
And this is where the modern movement takes a huge political risk, because ʿAbd makes this crucial distinction that really separates him from the traditionalists.
He does. He argues that the core 5 pillars of worship, the rituals of the faith, those are unchangeable. That's the fixed point.
But everything else, the vast body of social relations, legal matters like commercial law, criminal law, family law.
All of that, he said, is subject to reform and rational reinterpretation. He was essentially telling traditional scholars, you can't freeze society in time because you're mistaking human history for divine law.
And that distinction, that gave the modernists the flexible space they needed to operate. We see this all across the Muslim world.
For sure. I mean, the Tunisian reformer Khair al-Din al-Tunisi, for example, he argued forcefully for acquiring Western institutions and practices, like liberty, so long as they were compatible with the spirit of the Shariah.
He wasn't just saying copy the West.
No, not at all. He believed liberty was crucial for peace and prosperity in its own right, not just some Western import. It was a very pragmatic approach.
They weren't trying to become the West, but they realized they needed to adopt its inventive and institutional superiority.
And Muhammad Iqbal captured this tension perfectly. He appreciated the West's advancements in science and technology, but he was fiercely critical of what he saw as its godless, materialistic philosophy.
He and others like Maulana Abdul Majid Daryabadi, they were actively trying to bridge faith and science.
Right. Arguing that the roots of modern scientific inquiry could be traced back to the Quran itself, to its call for observation and reason. They were impressing upon Muslims that the way to truly defend the community was not just through political resistance, but by participating in global scientific research and advancement.
So the core message from the modernists was clear. The problem isn't Islam. The problem is the failure to use the intellectual tools Islam provides to learn from and integrate the progressive parts of modernity.
But all these theoretical arguments for reform, they suddenly collided with a very practical political reality in 1924.
Yes, that year stands as a massive watershed moment. The abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate.
I mean, regardless of how weak the Ottoman Empire was, the Caliphate was the symbolic political head of the Ummah for centuries. And its abolition just ripped that traditional structure out from under the global Muslim community. It sent shockwaves everywhere.
And the response was wildly polarized. On one side, you had massive agitation like the Caliphate movement in India trying to restore this symbol of unity.
But on the other, and this is key, major intellectuals actually supported the abolition.
Like Muhammad Iqbal, the thinker.
Exactly.
Oh.
He supported the Turkish Republican move as a necessary act of ijtihad. He argued that a republican form of government where political sovereignty belongs to the Muslim people was entirely consistent with the spirit of Islam.
And, in fact, necessary for the modern era.
Then you had the Egyptian scholar, ʿAbd al-Raziq, who was even more radical. He argued that the Caliphate was not essential in Islam at all.
He completely separated faith and political structure.
He did. He said the Prophet's mission was primarily spiritual and prophetic, not that of a political ruler. So the spiritual community of Islam, he argued, has no necessary relation to any one specific form of government.
So you have this huge intellectual spectrum emerging, some saying the caliphate is dispensable, others, the pan-Islamists like Afghani, stressing political unity, and then you get figures like Hassan al-Banna.
Right, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. His vision was a grassroots effort. It was focused on realizing the complete practice of Sharia law and ultimately restoring the caliphate. And this really set the stage for the conflict over political legitimacy that we still see today.
Especially in new post-colonial states.
And the best laboratory for this tension is probably Pakistan, a state founded precisely on the identity of Islam. It's raison d'etre.
And the debate over democracy there is the perfect expression of this ideological split. Traditional Islamists will argue that sovereignty belongs only to Allah.
And that sovereignty is expressed through Sharia as interpreted by the ulema, the scholars.
But the Islamic modernists, they just flip that script. They argue that, yes, sovereignty belongs to God, but it's exercised by the elected parliament, the representatives of the Muslim people.
And that's the core tension. Is political authority held by a closed circle of religious experts or by the dynamic will of the people? It's a tension that's still unresolved in constitutions across the Middle East and South Asia.
Which brings us directly to the messy world of Section 4. What happens when these high-flying theoretical ideas actually hit the ground and become state policy?
Implementation. That's always where the conflicts arise, particularly when modern states try to apply traditional Sharia mandates to modern legal systems.
We see this so vividly with the controversy over Pakistan's Hudud Ordinance of 1979 and its blasphemy laws.
These specific laws mandate very harsh maximum punishments, like the penalties for zina or theft, that are often seen as disproportionate. They rely on archaic standards of evidence, and that sparks huge internal controversy among reform-minded Muslims.
The sources cite scholars like Javed Ahmad Ghamidi, who are pushing back hard against the literalism of these laws.
They are. They argue that capital punishment should be much more restricted, reserved only for something like homicide or severe societal disruption, what's called fitna. They're using Ijtihad to reinterpret the penal code based on the underlying spirit of justice.
And these legal challenges almost always intersect with women's rights. The sources highlight the case of Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim nation.
Right, where after the 1998 Reformation, over 150 regional Sharia-based policies were introduced that actively discriminated against women. It shows the problem isn't the faith itself, but how fallible human institutions, often driven by local politics, choose to interpret and enforce it.
But it's not all negative. The sources also emphasize this focus on good governance and consultation. Reformers constantly point back to the Covenant of Medina, which established a city-state based on tolerance.
Or the administrative letter of Hazrat Ali on ensuring justice for the populace. This focus on justice and consultation, it links directly back to the possibility of a non-theocratic state.
You have thinkers like Asghar Ali Engineer who argue that secularism, and we have to be careful how we define that.
Right. Defined as a system that creates social and political space for all religious communities.
Is entirely compatible with the core democratic spirit of the Quranic principle of consultation, of shura. The goal is justice, not necessarily clerical rule.
And that sets the stage perfectly for what is arguably the most contemporary and powerful intellectual development, the theoretical shift we see in Section 5.
We are talking about the move toward maqasid al-Sharia.
The intents or the higher goals of Islamic law. And this is a genuinely transformative approach. It's favored by many new generation Islamists and liberal reformers.
So it's a way of moving beyond the literal word or the specific historical application of a text and focusing instead on its core universal purpose.
Exactly. Instead of asking, did the prophet have a caliphate? They're asking, what are the universal goals the Sharia is trying to protect?
And those goals are typically defined as 5 things: faith, life, reason, progeny, and property or wealth.
By prioritizing these higher aims, these thinkers can rationally and purposively engage with tradition. It makes legal reform much more flexible.
And this allows contemporary Islamists figures like Jasim Sultan or Ahmad al-Raisuni to argue that the political sphere is fundamentally anthropocentric.
Meaning it's centered on human needs and reason. Political organization should be resolved through reasoned debates seeking consensus, not through fixed, ancient juridico-political frames of authority.
This is a radical shift because it elevates human political reasoning. They make this crucial analytical distinction. Shura, consultation, is the universal mandatory principle.
But Khilafah, the Caliphate, was merely a historical procedure for governance. It was an act of human political judgment, or Ijtihad, in its own time.
Which means the political sphere isn't sacred and unchangeable. These modern thinkers advocate for a distinction, not a total separation, between the religious and political spheres.
The secular political process springs from religious principles, but it has to remain flexible because human life is constantly inventing and changing.
And this philosophical stance leads to an intensely practical, rational approach to political strategy.
Right. A political actor, under this rational state model, has to be strictly rational. They follow a strategic process. They're not guided by ideology alone.
The sources provide a fascinating anecdote to illustrate this pragmatism. They cite a medieval fatwa from the influential scholar Ibn Taymiyyah.
Yes, where he advised a political appointee to stay in his post, even though he was being compelled to commit some minor wrongs by a corrupt ruler.
Why?
Because resigning would have resulted in even greater corruption and injustice for the community as a whole. The calculus was pure strategy. Minimize the overall evil or maximize the achievable justice, even if it met a temporarily ideological contradiction.
So the ideological dream must never override a sober, rational assessment of reality.
Exactly. Politics, in this refined view, because a strategic exercise in maximizing positive outcomes, delaying battles, minimizing foes, and forging temporary alliances, even if they seem to contradict surface-level religious edicts. It's a complete repositioning of political action away from rigid dogma toward flexible effectiveness.
So if we pull back and synthesize this journey for you, the listener, what is the core takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the key insight is that the history of modern Islamic political thought is really an intellectual balancing act. It is a constant negotiation between the foundational text, the Quran and Sunnah, and the constantly evolving, fallible human application of those texts in the real world.
And this is where the Maqasid model brings us full circle. It links those theoretical concepts right back to the legal conflicts we saw in Section 4.
It does. If a literalist application of a law like the Hudud ordinances results in clear injustice, which violates the maqam of protecting justice and life, then the error, the failure,
lies not in the divine text, but in the fallible human interpretation.
Exactly. That feedback loop is everything. The shift to Maqasid highlights that continuous critical evaluation, Ijtihad, is not just a tool for religious scholars. It's an existential requirement for any just modern state.
It emphasizes that Islamic legal and political systems are inherently dynamic,
provided Muslims are brave enough to use the reason the faith itself demands, which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider.
The great modern reformers, they insisted that acquiring modern scientific and institutional knowledge was the essential defense against colonialism and decline.
So if we accept the emerging consensus that the caliphate was merely a historical ijtihad, a human invention, and not a divine requirement, what does that imply for the role of individual Muslims today?
If the political structure is flexible, is applying modern scientific knowledge, modern governance principles, and political ethics, is that the new necessary definition of defending the faith in the 21st century?
Is the battleground less about restoring a historic state form and more about achieving the maqasid of justice and progress in the here and now? Some to mull over long after we've put this stack away.